All right, guys, welcome back to another video. Right now, there's a situation going on called being house poor. It's pretty much where you get a house, you don't do the calculations on the mortgage, and you end up being um, pretty much living in poverty in like $500,000 house. I wanted to go ahead and talk about this with Anthony, and yeah, let's get started. Um, Anthony, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So it's no surprise that when you buy a house, it's most likely going to be probably the biggest purchase you've ever made. And with that being said, a lot of people don't take extra precaution when picking out their house. Everybody wants the bigger and the better things, but you have to realize that we're not just talking about a car here or that new T-shirt you wanted. We're talking about something that is like an investment that's going to take a great chunk of your life to actually save for and pay off for. Not to mention, we all know about the compounding effect and how it's so important to get your money right from an earlier age so that you can prosper in the later years. And having that big mortgage payment that you can't afford because you wanted the bigger house, or somebody like your wife or spouse or girlfriend said, hey, we should get this house, I like it, it's pink, it's got 4 bedrooms, 5 baths, and I want it. Okay, you got to realize that once you make that decision, there's no going back. You've now signed your soul on the dotted line that you're going to continue making these large, massive payments on this house for a very long period of time. And so what ends up happening is you end up becoming house poor. You thought that you had the money and the means to get this house, but then you start to realize how much of your capital it actually takes. And then you feel like you're strapped down, you have no extra money, and there goes any little bit of chance you had to really invest and save and grow.
Yeah, I mean, like some of that capital could just straight up be let's start with like the basics, the mortgage, utilities, and that's like some of the stuff that people typically calculate when they're thinking, okay, am I going to be able to afford this house? But a lot of people don't calculate, they might forget about taxes potentially. They might forget about closing costs potentially. That's just the initial price of a house. But they might even forget about maintenance, and maintenance is a big one. Um,
Yep.
as soon as you buy a house, that people always say that like magically stuff starts breaking. It could be a water heater. It could be you just found out there's a leak on the roof. And
Mhm.
before you know it, you have to be living on ramen noodles just to afford your mortgage.
Yep. And a lot of people
um,
don't, but
Go
having a
ahead.
very expensive house is almost like also having a hypercar. Like the same way that you're going to have to pay a premium for that insurance because of how expensive it is, and the same way that you're going to pay a premium just to get the brake pads replaced and getting parts replaced is the exact same thing of the house. Like, things don't last forever, and unless your house is brand newly built, it's most likely gonna have leaks, cracks, um, issues. Like sometimes you just get these really bad lemons of a house and nobody knows why, but those are just going to be part of the process that you didn't factor in before you got the house. So you have to make sure that you're factoring in all of that. You have to make sure that you're not thinking about just the mortgage, but about, like Josue said, the closing costs, repairs. And so, given that being said, um, I think it's very important that you try to get something a little bit below your means and try to really think about getting a house in a frugal manner.
All right, so right now I got pulled up the average cost of a home in the U.S., which is 420,000. We found a house here for 450,000, just a little over in the Tampa Bay area. And if we take a look at the Zestimate on Zillow, it's gonna say $2,650 a month. And they're pretty this amount, this estimate is pretty on the lower end. If you were to actually factor in like everything else that we talked about, it's going to come out to definitely something on the higher end. But if you are in one of these situations right now where you've already bought the house and you're currently house poor, or maybe you know someone in the same circumstance, um, I would say the only thing you can potentially do is either cut costs in other places, or get a better job. And it might seem obvious, but a lot of people just don't think that like, oh, it's not possible to cut costs. Like, I just got this new job. I don't want to quit my job potentially. But I mean, right off the bat, if you really wanted to cut costs as much as you can, you don't want to be eating those ramen noodles in order to afford your mortgage. I'd say the biggest thing you can do that'll make the most significant change is if you have a car payment. If you end up selling your car and getting a used vehicle, that will get rid of the car payment as well as the full coverage insurance, and you might be able to go for the minimum coverage in your state. Um, if we're talking about food, I think food is the third largest expense in someone's life. Um, we're talking about food banks. If you qualify, potentially food stamps. There's definitely nothing wrong with either of those two options. If you gotta, um, pay the bills. We're talking maybe switching insurance coverages and reducing unnecessary spending is also a big one. It could be eating out. It could be buying new clothes, reducing those. Um, and do you have any other ideas on how to reduce spending?
Yeah, just not buy the house in general. The best way you can prevent a bad mistake is by preventing the bad mistake in itself.
Yeah, that's true.
And you know, yeah, sure, you can sit here and you can start nickel and diming yourself until you have absolutely nothing but one water bottle from a 40 pack of Walmart a day to live off of, and a ramen noodles that you might have to break into half and split into a 30-day basis, so you have 60 days worth of eating half a ramen. Or you could just listen to what we're telling you, go on the mortgage expectation app that he was just on, um, and see if you can afford that. Now we know that the average income in America is about $60,000 per individual. So assuming that you're single, $60,000 brings in about, what is that, $4,000 a month. So if your rent is coming out to almost, three quarters of that, or over half, it's definitely too much. In fact, there's a great rule of thumb called the I believe it's called the 30% rule or the 35% rule, basically insinuating that if the cost of your home, at least in the mortgage sense, is costing more than 35% of your total income, you've shot too far, you've shot too high, and you own something that you should not have. And this is actually, in my opinion, very true, because you need to be able to have that 30% rule, that you're spending only on the mortgage, so that you can invest with maybe 30% and then maybe just regularly save with the other 30%, or maybe you're paying off a car. But regardless, it's a very crucial to understand that you want to look at this as a percentage based situation, and you also want to try to look into the future. Like, you can always get a new job and you can always cut back expenses, but the best thing you can do is just not overspend to begin with. And that would be my overall answer for that.
Absolutely. I mean, other than overspending on other sectors and trying to save money, the best that you could do is try to make more money. It could be picking up a part-time job. It could be a side hustle. It could be just getting a new job altogether for a higher paying position. And the odds are, like, if you've been in that position for a year or longer, heck, I'd even say 6 months, um, you'll most likely be able to find a higher paying position that's in the same role with a different company. Um, but yeah, definitely. Let me see here.
I'd say somewhat, like, if you had to take away, a couple of key points, it would definitely be, take a look at the 35% rule of your total annual income, right? This is very important. Then you got to look at job security. Are you easily replaceable? If you get fired, what will you do? That's important. And then you got to look at your exterior additional expenses. Like, do you have a car payment already? Did you already screw up in that department? Do you have children? Are you married? So, you got to factor in all those different variables as well.
Yeah, so let's say you're looking to buy a house and you don't want to end up being house poor. We do have options on how to actually avoid that. Right off the bat, it's like, don't buy a house at all. and just stick with renting. Right now, renting is significantly lower um, than mortgages. Let's go ahead and look
And
at some numbers again.
also, you do also want to do your research on the location that you're trying to buy a home or rent a home, and this is going to vary county to county, town to town, state to state. For example, I live in Florida, as does Josue, and this is, I think, considered the third most expensive state in the United States to own property, to own a house, etc. And my friend who moved away from Florida to Illinois, he's in one of the cheapest um, states that you can live in to own a house or a home. And our homes basically triple the cost of their homes for the equivalent of what you get. So if you're really adamant about, okay, well, I need this house to be big because I want to have children. I need a lake in my backyard because fishing is my passion, or I need land because land is something that I've always wanted for dirt bike riding or crops or whatever. Then consider moving to another state. Like there's going to be other alternative options for housing that may just not fit in your budget in this particular state or region, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist elsewhere. So it's very important to do your own due diligence and do in-depth research, especially on the zoning.
Yeah, I mean, moving out of the state is an option. Moving out of the city is also an option. People might not want to do that just because their quality of life might go down. They might not be closer to the grocery store. They might not be closer to the nightlife. But like the American dream is definitely something that doesn't come as easy nowadays. Back then, you'll be able to buy a house that's maybe only twice the cost of your annual income. Nowadays, that same house is going to be 5 times as much as your annual income, maybe even more.
Oh
But
yeah.
let's look at, oh yeah, go ahead.
So my grandpa moved down here in Florida in the early 1990s, and he was at the time the houses were going for, I believe, like $40,000, and I believe people were bringing in about 35,000 on average or 30,000, which basically tells you that the average household income or individual was making $35,000 a year, but the houses were costing about 40 to 50,000. Now we've only made about double that, like 60,000 on average. But the houses have gone up probably like four times that to like 150, 200, 250,000, which is like 4 to 5 times more expensive. Whereas to own a home back 25, 35 years ago, it was simply only about 1.20 sorry 0.20 times more than what you were bringing home annually. And I'm saying 0.20, like not even a whole, you get what I'm trying to say. Not even a whole 100%, 20% more expensive than what you could. So if you could just save for a year in like 3 months, and you could save all your money, that would be enough to get you a home near the water 35 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I would say the other option to not end up being as poor is renting. Let me go pull up a renting versus buying calculator.
Yeah, and we honestly are moving more into a situation where renting is becoming a more likely thing, given the housing market skyrocketing without the average wage getting anywhere near that. It seems as we're progressing through these decades, it's becoming a wider and wider gap between how much people are making and how much it costs to own. Whereas like rent is, maybe you're not owning the property and you won't ever own it, but at least you're able to have that extra capital so that you can invest and save as you need to be doing.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Let me pull it up here. Wait, hold on, give me 1 second, I think. So yeah, right now I have a calculator, and in the graph it shows the average price in in the graph, it shows the average price of renting in the US, as well as the average price of a house right here. The graph also tells us that it's gonna always be it's always gonna cost less to actually rent than it is to buy. Now, wait, hold on, let me see this shit.
Yeah, and that doesn't even factor in the fact that you're not responsible for the house repairs or the tax on the house or anything like that. So you actually save probably more than that unless it's factoring that in. You should click show options and see if it's factoring in those other additional expenses that may not be listed.
So for this one, it's going to be showing renter's insurance, but let me go ahead and check the mortgage options. Um, Property tax, HOA fees. In this situation, it's not calculating HOA fees, but depending where you move, that's definitely going to be a big factor. I think in Florida right now, HOA fees are so high that it's actually affecting condo prices, and condos are getting cheaper because the HOA fees are getting higher. I mean, just from this graph alone, it's going to be able to tell you whether or not it's a good option to rent instead of buying. But the most important thing in this situation that if you're renting, you want to make sure you're investing the extra cash that you're saving from not buying a house and stuff. And this is definitely going to be able to help you save for a house or even just like help you get your return on renting. I know a lot of people don't like renting just because you're pretty much paying for another person's mortgage. Um, but investing is definitely going to be able to get you on that.
The way I see it, though, as an alternative thing, is we're starting here at the bottom. And in order for us to be able to experience the benefit of the compounding effect, we need to be able to have as much capital now as possible. And the people that own the homes are people that started off at this exact same step, but have been able to grow their money so much that they were able to buy these properties and then rent them out and collect that as external revenue. Whereas, like, we're at step one, building ourselves up there, and it's not ideal to go out and try to own a house when you have nowhere near the amount of capital required in even a tenth of a fraction to actually own the house. I mean, some of these charts are just most people, I don't even know what the stat is, but it's like 90% of Americans don't even have like 5K in the bank. So to assume that this calculator, what the calculator is saying, having a $90,000 down payment is also extremely like unlikely. Um, so it's like even considering that, you'd still need to make sure that it just you definitely want to rent is what we're trying to get out here because it just costs too much if you're starting out from ground zero and you're risking too much of the amount of money that you could be saving and investing on paying on renting or for a mortgage and like potential um housing repairs and taxes and all that stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, another way to avoid being house poor would be to increase your down payment. But I mean, that example alone, 20% on almost a half a million dollar house, 90,000 just for 20% is absolutely crazy. So the only thing you'd really be able to do is buy a cheaper house, something that maybe needs a little bit of work done, something that's been around for a little longer. A lot of the time, someone may rent, person who's going to rent a smaller house ends up buying a bigger house because they're going to be having it for longer. They're going to be able to call it theirs, so they want it to be nicer. So buying a smaller house doesn't necessarily mean that you're lower in status. I'd argue that buying a smaller house and having more money invested into the market is going to be, or just in general, just not being house poor is going to increase your status. Maybe not visually, but you could definitely tidy up a house. Make something look a little nice and polish it up.
all right, I say we pretty much talked about everything we really need to as far as being house poor and what not to do, what to look out for, how to prevent it if you can, and the alternatives and so forth. Was there anything else you wanted to add, or did we pretty much sum it all up?
No, Anthony, that's pretty much it. All I gotta say is we gotta make America wealthy again.